And so again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and spending your part of your Wednesday evening listening to me. And so my goal for this presentation is to have you question what a sustainable city looks like to you, and how when we think about sustainability as climate advocates, how one sector of our economy is frequently overlooked in the fight against climate change. And so we know that we're facing a climate crisis. We know that our burning of fossil fuels is one of the major and most tangible causes of that thickening greenhouse gas layer in our atmosphere, which is leading to a warmer climate. We have warming global temperatures, strengthening and more frequent natural disasters, habitat loss, massive amounts of CO2 entering our atmosphere, and we see it in the news daily. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that climate change is the biggest threat facing humanity today. And now there are so many ways that our current society and the ways that we live have contributed to the climate crisis, and we could spend so much time just talking about all of those different factors. But tonight, I wanted to talk to you about how our rapid urbanization of our cities and car-centric street designs have led to unsustainable cities. And so according to the EPA, as of 2019, 29% of our greenhouse gas emissions, gases like CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, those harmful chemicals that we're putting into our atmosphere that are contributing to our changing climate, comes from the transportation sector. And of that 29%, over 50% of transportation emissions are coming from light duty vehicles or personal vehicles like personal cars and trucks. And now obviously the invention of the automobile and our subsequent burning of fuel to run those automobiles starting in the late 1880s contributed to the stark rise of greenhouse gas emissions in the last few centuries, but so did the urbanization of our cities and the prevalence of urban sprawl. So here's an aerial view of a map of Columbia in 1869. And you can see Broadway here running east to west. And here Columbia is a little over a square mile large. And here's an aerial map of Columbia today at 63 square miles. And I couldn't zoom in to kind of get the same perspective just because of how big the city has gotten in the last 160 to 200 years. And so here's where Broadway lies now as compared to that map from before. And now obviously over time, as populations grow, cities will get bigger, but we see cities like Columbia now sprawling out instead of upwards. And so if you were able to attend our Strong Towns presentations last week by Chuck Marone, he talked a little bit about this. And so what do I mean by building out versus building up? So as cities got bigger, then the spread to the outskirts of town, building more and bigger roads to accommodate that expansion instead of denser housing closer to the center of town. And now all of this is done, we've built it and it's here. But this is where our car-centric society that contributes over a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions to our nation's total greenhouse gas emissions. And in Columbia, transportation also contributes about that same number. So about 27% of our greenhouse gas emissions here in Columbia comes from personal vehicle use. And so this photo on the left here is the intersection of Worley and Stadium Boulevard. And so here we have a group of people doing a walk audit. And so this is people from Local Motion, some of our neighborhood leaders, and some of our members. And so we're just assessing like how safe the street is, how safe it feels, if there are sidewalks, crosswalks, how long you have to walk across that crosswalk of Stadium. And Stadium Boulevard feeds into so many housing developments, grocery stores, offices, the mall, so many apartment complexes. And besides folks on that walk audit there, you can see that this road isn't really made for people walking and biking. It's made for people who are in cars. And so on the right, you can see a thriving city street where, yes, there are still cars, but those cars are probably going slower and people can still drive on these roads. But this road also encourages people to walk, bike, and take public transit. So you can see some buses right here. You can see very distinctive protected bike lanes and this really visible crosswalk. And so this street just looks much safer and enjoyable to be on, no matter if you're driving a car or you're walking versus that photo on the left of Stadium. And we can apply this example to a couple of big major roads in Columbia, Providence, Stadium, some parts of Broadway and Scott Boulevard, College Avenue, Business Loop, places like that. And if we continue to build out and don't add public transportation, bike lanes, it leads to more people driving and more greenhouse gas emissions if we keep creating these roads that lead to suburbs miles and miles outside of town and don't give people the environments where they feel like they can easily access their basic needs by walking, biking, and taking transit. And then we create these car-centered cities, and then we also create, therefore, these unsustainable cities. And so we've grown in population and we've built houses farther and farther from the center of town, and that's fine, and that's done. And so now we think, how can we help curb greenhouse gas emissions and our impact on climate change? And so immediately we think of solar panels on every building and every home, maybe a wind farm outside of Columbia somewhere, maybe electric vehicle charging stations instead of gas stations, or more green spaces. And something that we commonly forget about, and especially in the sustainability community, is transportation and building streets for people who walk, bike, and take transit. And I don't mean just brightening the paint on a crosswalk or giving every person in Columbia a bike. And while those are great improvements, that won't necessarily automatically solve our transportation emissions and climate change problems. And so I'm talking about an overhaul in how we build streets and roads. And we can't change that folks are now living and working farther out of the center of town, but we can change how they get there, and we can change how we build into the future as well. And so currently, and this includes in Columbia, we focus on building codes, retrofitting buildings to be more energy efficient, building stormwater retention ponds, and building more native gardens, planting trees, which are, again, all amazing and great things to combat this huge crisis we're going through. But one general area that we commonly forget about, again, especially in the sustainability community, is transportation and building streets. So I want to emphasize the building streets for people who walk, bike, and take transit. Things like building in accessible areas where, say, people can get to their basic needs within a few miles, like grocery stores, jobs, schools, doctor's appointments, and just even building bike lanes, but even better protected bike lanes, and expanding and having a thriving public transit system. And then again, investing in and repairing sidewalks. And so, like I said, those current green changes that we're trying to make are really great, and I don't want to take away from that. But when we just leave it to slapping some solar panels on a building or a home, or we put a small native garden to filter and treat stormwater in a strip next to a building, we miss a huge opportunity to instead ask the question, how are people going to get to these locations or this building? And again, Chuck from Strong Towns talked about this last week. And so we get a building that might be very green in its infrastructure and its technology, but might also encourage people to drive to that location and again, put more carbon emissions into our atmosphere. And so let's take the new Boone County Nature School, for example. So this school is a partnership between Columbia Public Schools and the Missouri Department of Conservation and a few other entities. It's going to be a place-based learning facility for children interested in natural resources, and it will be retrofitted with all this great new green technology and design. But its location will unfortunately be between Columbia and Ashland, right off of 63 South. And so if buses run there, they likely won't be frequent, and people living in either of those cities surely won't be able to bike and walk to this school. And so this is just one example of how we've taken every piece of green technology and into consideration, except for transportation, which we know, again, is a quarter of the source of our greenhouse gas emissions just here in Columbia, and not including the nation as well. And here in Columbia, we have the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which is a culmination of a ton of hard work by a lot of folks in town. It includes a lot of suggestions and guidance with how to start shifting Columbia towards a more sustainable city, and is geared toward what I mentioned a few slides ago, into creating institutions like the Boone County Nature School. And the Boone County Nature School is it's a huge achievement, and I don't also want to take away from that either, because I mean it's going to be an amazing experience for students and their adults and everyone involved in that process. But the CAP also includes how to promote renewable energy, creating urban forests and green spaces, water and waste minimization, and there's also a section just dedicated to transportation and land use. And so as a transportation advocacy organization here at Local Motion, we are trying to really hone in on that transportation section of the CAP, because we know that in Columbia and in the nation, how much transportation contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And we also know that in cities where people can walk, bike, and take the bus where they need to go, those are inherently greener and more sustainable places to live, because it takes people out of those personal vehicles and onto the street as pedestrians or people on bikes or people riding public transit. which means we need an overhaul in our alternative transportation systems here in Colombia. So here's Wabash Station in the early 1900s, when Colombia's population was between 5 and around 9,000 people. And so fast forward 120 years and our population is at 121,000 people. And Wabash Station is the exact same size. And so today, even though our population is 13 times that than in the early 1900s. And again, our depot station for buses has remained the same exact size. And so the transit system that we need to support this population that has grown to 63 square miles requires so much more infrastructure than what Wabash can provide. And so one step towards a more robust and thriving transportation system is through the complete streets model. And complete streets are designed and operated so they work for all users. They work for people who are walking, people on bikes, motorists, transit riders, and all of those people of all ages and abilities. And complete street policies are an essential tool in providing transportation choices, like I said last slide, beyond their personal vehicle. And so I wanted to mention that studies in Europe have shown that for cities that increase biking infrastructure, like bike lanes, people are far more likely to take longer trips by bike to their basic needs. So again, like groceries, doctor's appointments, things like that, cutting their greenhouse gas emissions. And it doesn't just take a few bike lanes to curb emissions and get folks to switch their trips from cars to alternative transportation. It's investing in this transportation system, like I said. Multiple factors go into this. And there's also this argument that Europe is not the United States when it comes to street design and sustainability. But countries in Europe used to have streets that looked like ours until they made these investments in street design. And so I'm going to show you a short video of Copenhagen and how they're starting to do that. And so I'm going to show you the beginning part of the video and then the end. The middle kind of goes into their other sustainable energy generation.
Cities all over the world are bursting with people. More than half of us live in cities now, and by 2050, that number jumps to nearly 70%. That's a lot of people. So how do we grow cities sustainably? And with the climate crisis, figuring out how we do that is more important than ever before. But there's one city that may be doing it better than any other place on earth.
We want to become the first carbon neutral capital city by 2025.
So we packed up our gear and headed here to Copenhagen, Denmark to find out how. It's not surprising to learn that 2/3 of the world's carbon emissions come from cities. That number is getting worse as more of us move into cities, which means a higher demand on infrastructure and resources. So Copenhagen is on a mission to cancel out all of their carbon emissions.
My name is Frank Jensen, and I'm the mayor of Copenhagen. When I became mayor, we started this process. We decided that we would want to become the first carbon neutral capital city by 2025.
What does carbon neutrality actually mean? For a city, it's creating more renewable energy than the dirty energy it uses. It's all about achieving a net zero. And their plan is focusing on mobility, pollution, and energy.
We have introduced a lot of new solutions in Copenhagen. Our bicycle infrastructure is world famous because today 62% of the Copenhageners use their bike for daily transportation.
Everyone in Copenhagen bikes, and I mean everyone. So the city is leaning into that. In the last 10 years, it has invested nearly $300 million to improve biking infrastructure. All that money is paid off. There are more than 5 times the amount of bikes than cars in the city. That goes a long way when cutting down on carbon emissions. But the effort doesn't stop there. Copenhagen has totally transformed their water. Is the people. The residents here actually want to help build a sustainable city and are willing to work for it.
The citizens of Copenhagen, they demand a high quality of urban life. They are willing to do a lot themselves. They want to sort their own garbage. They want to bike to work. Citizens' involvement is key to the way we think in Denmark and the Nordic countries. That's a huge driving force behind being a carbon neutral city by 2025.
Since I became mayor in 2010, we have a growth rate in the number of citizens with 20%, and even that we have cut our emissions with 42% in the same period. So we show that you can have growth, green transformation if you do the right investments in the city.
Copenhagen's transformation hasn't been easy, and of course their size and wealth helps, but they've made it work for their city. Regardless if they hit their carbon neutral deadline, their ultimate goal is to serve as an example for cities everywhere.
The green transformation of cities and livability, and also, very important, good economy goes hand in hand. I see Copenhagen as a front runner to show for my colleagues and decision makers, you must go green.
All righty. And so like they said in that video, and like we've been talking about, in order to create sustainable cities, we need a bunch of factors working together. So walking infrastructure, bike lanes, a thriving public transit system combined with designing complete streets for all users, building narrower and slower streets. And also like the mayor of Copenhagen just said, the will of people to also switch their trips by walking, biking, or transit and get less cars on the road and less CO2 in our atmosphere. And so people often think of electric vehicles as the major way out of contributing to our transportation greenhouse gas emissions, but traffic is traffic no matter if you're replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric vehicles in those lanes. And as you can see from this graphic, switching your car, so right here, switching your car from a gas-powered vehicle to an electric-powered vehicle is still a lower impact than living car-free. And so electric vehicles are still a great option, but again, they don't offer widespread solutions to our climate crisis or our traffic problem. And so here's an article from 2017 about how even Tesla's parking lot, made up of what I imagine are a lot of electric vehicles, couldn't even fit all of their employees' cars and were encouraging folks to bike to work. So you can replace the car, but that doesn't also erase that parking shortage. And I also wanted to hit on building biking, walking, and walking infrastructure in natural spaces. And so, especially when it comes to commuter trails, like say the MKT here in town, and its impact on green spaces. And I definitely hear that. My background is in natural resources conservation, and so. But I feel like we often forget this bigger picture where we settle for developing square mile after square mile of land and building developments and roads, but then focus in on and object to a trail through a green space. And again, I hear that to build those trails, part of the habitat will be disturbed, but the bigger picture means less cars on the road, people who can't afford cars getting where they need to go safely, and nature regrowing around that trail to enable folks to spend some time in nature while also using alternative transportation to get where they need to go. And I also, along those lines of not seeing the bigger picture necessarily, I wanted to also mention this very quickly, is the cost of biking, of building biking, walking, and public transit infrastructure, and how that always seems to be prohibitive to evolving. And we've always been programmed to believe in a car-centric society that we can spend tons and tons of money on resurfacing roads and building that extra highway mile or street lane. But we know that that doesn't work for decreasing traffic. And it doesn't, more importantly, and more on topic, it doesn't decrease emissions either. And so reconstructing a major street like Stadium in a small urban area would set us back about $1.5 million per mile. And of course, this is a variable number just because of all the factors that go into it. But a protected bike lane, and this isn't just like a painted bike lane, this is a protected bike lane, would cost as low as $100,000 per mile to the highest amount, which would be about $530,000 a mile, according to the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. And so if that's not convincing enough, we also know that 1 mile of bike lane and that associated sidewalk could fit and travel more people than in that 1 mile of roadway. And so no matter how many lanes we pay for, urban streets will almost always be more inefficient at getting people who are driving where they need to go. And so I'm going to show you a really quick 1-minute video of what I mean. And so as you can see in that video, it was kind of what I was talking about before, how many, I think it was 200 people in cars, buses, trams, and on bikes, and then walking. And those folks in buses and trams and walking and biking all crossed that starting line before all of the people in cars did. Okay, so where do we go from here? And this can be a really overwhelming issue to talk about because besides walking and biking and riding the bus with the infrastructure that we already have in our towns or in Columbia, the solutions can feel a little bit out of reach. And so I encourage you all to read and share information about Columbia's Climate Action Adaptation Plan. And you can also learn more about it by going to comoclimateaction.org. And a lot of people in Columbia don't know about it. And the more folks do know and value this plan, they can make it a priority, like say when a new street design project or a new development projects comes forward to city council, people will know about this plan and know what it entails and be able to remind city council that maybe we should think about this when we're planning new projects. And there's also an election on November 2nd for the park sales tax. I believe that's the only thing that will be voted on during that election. And I very much encourage all of you to educate yourselves on the park sales tax and your friends and family of voting age, get them registered to vote, and then educate them on the tax, which among a bunch of projects, it will fund about 9 miles of commuter trails throughout Columbia and especially Northern Columbia, which is something that we really wanted to see if that's passed. And I also encourage you to look up and read more about the philosophies of Smart Growth America and Strong Towns. They not only have really awesome articles about sustainability and transportation, but they also have a lot of great resources about a lot of different things. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention keeping up to date with what we're doing at Local Motion. Especially in this next year and a half, we plan to run a campaign for a new and improved complete streets policy here in Columbia. And I talked about complete streets throughout the presentation, and Columbia has its own complete streets policy, but it is wildly outdated. And so this new policy would make it so that when a new street improvement project comes about, all street users are taken into consideration for that design. And with that, I wanted to thank you all again for coming. Here's Lawrence's beautiful face from like 2013, asking you if you have any comments, questions, compliments. We have some time to chat, or you can always, I'll put my email in the chat as well once I'm done sharing my screen. And yeah. Let me put my email in the chat if asking questions during a group presentation is not your thing. Oh, no, that didn't work. Does anyone have any questions? Comments?
Erica, this is Lawrence.
Yes.
I had a question. So you were saying, so would it not be just more environmentally friendly, say if I owned a gas powered car now, just, you know, that's a few years old, to just go out and buy a Tesla or something like that?
Well, we hit on that example, but thank you, Lawrence. No, probably not. As a wise person once told me, keeping your current gas car and instead maybe investing in a bike and advocating for streets for everyone is probably a little bit more environmentally friendly than just going out and buying a Tesla, because again, Teslas do have a climate impact, unfortunately, more so than say like buying a bike or walking or taking public transit wherever you go. Austin, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat too. What kinds of improvements will be included in the new safe streets or complete streets policy that you'll be advocating for compared to what the city has now?
We are currently here at Local Motion, and Lawrence and Annette are currently trying to write up that policy. But I know one major thing is that that doesn't happen now is once a project is initiated, that complete streets plan will have to be looked at in order to start that project. So it'll automatically create a pathway to kind of look at how can we make this project accessible for not just people in cars. Lawrence or Annette, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Erica, quick question.
Yeah.
What do people do in the winter when they're in Copenhagen? Like, how do they get around when it's icy and
So not including like getting a bike suited for, I don't know, rougher terrain like snow or ice or something. You don't even need to do that. What the most important part is just getting the right gear. So I think Lawrence has said multiple times when I started here is there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing and bad gear. And so, and unfortunately there is a cost that comes with that. So it's kind of can be cost prohibitive for some people, but I would imagine people just invest in really, really good and warm clothing. And I don't know exactly if people don't bike as much in Copenhagen in the winter, but I do know that a lot of folks will switch to like a mountain bike type bike instead to kind of handle those different weather. Lawrence, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I can add a little something. So the other quote I love to say is a car is a very expensive raincoat. So oftentimes, but the other thing with regard to say like Copenhagen is no, their biking rates do not decrease. They actually remain the same. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've invested in plowing those bike lanes and making sure that the streets are safe to utilize even in the winter times, because they do have a lot harsher weather than we do. They're very used to riding in the rain. But the other thing is in their designing codes, and Erica spoke to this, is the fact that you design your cities to have things that you need to go to every single day closer to where most people live. That way you don't separate where people live versus where they shop or go to school. So you put all those things closer together. It makes the ability to ride your bike much easier. Obviously in a design city, the way we have like here in Columbia, if you need to go grocery shopping, you're probably biking 5-6 miles in harsh weather, where in Copenhagen, it's going to be more like a mile. So.
Thanks, Lawrence. Ian, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thanks. That was a great presentation, Erica. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And you mentioned the Columbia's Climate Action Adaptation Plan. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts about the goals for transportation in that plan and how they align, or maybe not so much, with the separate, long-range transportation plan that the city and the metropolitan planning area have.
Yes, I feel like from what I know about the transportation section of the CAP, it could be way more geared. I feel like the long-range transportation plan could better utilize the CAP and link up with it and take more of the guidance that the CAP gives. I know that the long-range transportation plan, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, but I'm pretty sure it just is essentially a plan for how roads and streets and everything are built in town and for the future. Is that correct?
There's about $500 million worth of investment in new roads and expanded roads over the next 30 years.
Yeah, and I know that their public process isn't the best. But yeah, I would say that I think linking those two plans would be way more efficient in tackling our, not only just our complete streets goals, but also our climate action goals.
Thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I've got one thought. This is Don Harder. So I've been a lifetime adult commuter by bicycle, 37 years at university. Just always did transportation that way. So a lot of times when people hear these discussions, it sounds pretty abstract. And then Lawrence asked a good question, because that's what made me think of this. It sounds kind of elitist, like only people who can go out and buy a Tesla can reduce their transportation footprint. But yet in Copenhagen, it looks like that's how everybody gets around. I noticed too, everybody looks pretty fit compared to us. Just a quick glance, how do you make this transition that this is for everybody in the community, the sense that it's just not a few lucky fit people like Don Harder, who just seem to be naturally thin and active? How do the average people feel connected into this plan that they could actually do it and actuate on it? Yeah,
that's a great point and a great question. And I kind of think of it as like, so if we talk about sustainability in general, I feel like you don't make your life sustainable overnight, and that's impossible. It's overwhelming. It's expensive. But what you can do is start making little changes. You can bring a reusable cup to the coffee shop. You can, I don't know, start to buy used clothing more. And I feel like that's the same thing with trying to incorporate more walking, biking, and transit into your life. Is I think I was trying to calculate it for the presentation, but then it just turned into too many numbers. But I think studies have shown that even just reducing your trips by car, like 15% a week, can save so much, so much greenhouse gases going into our atmosphere. And so like if someone, I think, were to take, let's say you drive your car 14 times in a week, that's only dropping like maybe 5 of your car trips. And so I would encourage folks who maybe don't feel confident or maybe don't really want to navigate our transportation system by walking or biking or taking the bus to kind of just incorporate it little by little into your life. Like instead of driving to the MKT to go on a walk, maybe walk or bike to the MKT, or take the bus to the, I don't know if the bus doesn't go directly to the MKT, but you get what I'm getting at here. Or maybe try one week to, instead of driving to get groceries, to take the bus to get groceries out by Stadium Boulevard, something like that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it just seems like it's kind of challenging for average citizen to get there, because even right now, when you look at our city, very little of it is built in such a way to be done on this basis. But people like me, we make conscious choices of where to buy our homes in relation to where we shop and work, and then we can do it bicycle. But once you buy out of the Cascades, because one of my neighbors recently moved there due to her daughter living down there, she said, boy, it is really inconvenient out there. I'm just kind of shaking my head thinking, think of how many people live out there. And
and another thing I didn't mention is combining all three. Like you could, I know my coworker Jackson, sometimes he'll walk or bike to the bus station and then take the bus to our office. You don't need to only invest in a bike and only bike everywhere. You could, do all three, or just choose one that you're most comfortable with. But again, I feel like taking those tiny little steps can eventually go a long way.
And people that do bike, we're kind of a poster child, live by example. When my bicycle's at Gerb's with the commuter shopping panniers on it, and then I leave the store and people see my groceries on my bike. You just try to hope that message can be transmitted to people how they think.
And I think that is, I think that is a really great point as well. Leading by example does make an impact. It might not be as fast of an impact as we want, but it still makes one.
Hey, Don, this is Annette. Hey, I just wanted to respond to your question about the idea of some of our recommendations here. Sometimes the criticism is that it can be elitist, and with the idea that everyone needs to be wearing spandex or riding really expensive bikes. And I just wanted to kind of flip that on its head and point out that folks who most rely on walking, biking, and transit tend to be lower income people. So, and it's those of us who have more resources who are contributing more to the climate emission, or to emissions, because we tend to use our vehicles more. And so it actually, the lower income folks who have fewer resources are doing a great job of reducing their emissions, because they are already walking the walk of walking, biking, and transit. And it's those of us who have more resources who really need to switch to those forms of transportation that are less costly to the environment.
Thanks, Annette. Well said.
I have a question. I guess just to hear your thoughts on this. What direction do you think Columbia is currently headed, given that the Discovery Parkway is going to be extended for almost $7 million extension to ease traffic congestion, and regionally at least, like the Rocheport Bridge on each side will go from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. Based on what you've said, that seems like it's the wrong direction, but I'd like to hear what you think, or at least where you think we're headed at this point, and what we need to do to address some of those things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, or I guess you didn't say it was the wrong direction, but I do think it's the wrong direction, but I'm hoping that at least our situation can be like a, kind of like a 2 steps forward, maybe 3 steps backwards situation, where at least we can advocate for these things like in the center of town, like our first protected bike lane. That's not huge, but it's still a win. And like the park sales tax, being able to get those 9 miles of trails on that list. Or I don't hope it's a 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward situation, but I kind of feel like that's maybe what will happen, depending on, it's kind of hard because like the projects you mentioned, quote unquote, aren't up to like Columbia citizens necessarily to go to city council and say something about it, which I think kind of unfortunately makes it hard to balance like the projects we have here directly in town that people can directly advocate for and impact, rather than projects that are right outside of town, but of course still impact us and our, I guess that, I'm sorry, that was not a great answer, but I hope it goes in one direction, which is complete streets, but we will see. Anyone else? Again, I put my email in the chat up there. I would always open to talking either by email or on the phone if you have any questions. I also wanted to mention that if you're interested in learning more about sustainability itself or climate change, Mid-Missouri Peaceworks does a ton of classes about 3 or 4 times a year on both of those topics, and they kind of vary in exactly what they cover, so they're a little different every time. But so yeah, if you check them out on Facebook, they've got some classes set up as well. Alrighty, well, if no one else has anything, then I guess we'll call it good. Thank you all again for coming. I really appreciate it. I know it's not the most exciting thing on a Wednesday evening to sit on your computer, but I really appreciate it. So, and Gabby wanted me to mention that our next let's chat, I think she was going to put it in the chat. We'll see if it appears, but I can't find it fast enough. But anyway, there'll be a let's chat in November as well. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye. Thanks, Erica. Great job.
Thanks, Ian.